The first time Josie Edwards slipped an extra apple into the cowboy's sack. She told herself it was because he looked hungry, not because his eyes were the color of the Texas sky at dawn. It was August of 1882 in Springerville, Arizona Territory, and the summer heat made everything shimmer like a mirage across the dusty Main Street. Josie's father, Thomas Edwards, ran the only proper grocery in town, a wooden building with painted letters across the front that read Edwards General Store in bold red script. At 19 years old, Josie had spent most of her life behind that counter, weighing flour and wrapping parcels, watching the world pass by through windows that never seemed clean no matter how often she scrubbed them. The cowboy had walked in just after noon, his boots leaving dusty prints across the swept floor. He was tall, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, and he moved with the careful economy of someone who spent more time on horseback than on his own 2 feet. His hat was weathered, his clothes practical, and when he removed his hat in a gesture of respect, Josie noticed the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that spoke of somewhere further south, maybe Texas. "Need some supplies if you have them." "Of course," Josie replied, smoothing her apron with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. "What can I get for you?" He rattled off a simple list. Coffee, beans, salt pork, and apples if they were fresh. His eyes never quite met hers, fixed instead on some point past her shoulder, and Josie wondered if he was shy or simply accustomed to being alone. She gathered his items methodically, aware of her father working in the back room and the proper behavior expected of her. When she reached the barrel of apples, she selected 3 good ones, then added 2 more when she thought the cowboy was not looking, but he noticed. "I only asked for 3, miss." "These 2 were bruised," Josie lied smoothly, though all 5 apples were perfect specimens. "Cannot sell them anyway. Seems a shame to waste them." His eyes, when they finally met hers, held a question, but he simply nodded. "That is kind of you. What do I owe?" She calculated the total, her father's prices as familiar to her as her own name, and told him the amount. He paid in coins that he counted carefully from a worn leather pouch, and Josie noticed his hands were calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard for everything he had. "You are new in town?" she asked as she wrapped his purchases. "Just passing through," he said. "Working at the Miller Ranch for the season. Name is Peter Stone. Josie Edwards. My father owns the store. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Edwards." He tipped his hat again, gathered his parcels, and walked out into the blazing afternoon sun. Josie watched him go, telling herself she would forget him by evening. She was wrong. Peter Stone came back the next day and the day after that. Each time he needed something simple: tobacco, matches, a new bandana. Each time Josie found a reason to add something extra to his purchase. An extra stick of peppermint when he bought coffee. A slightly larger portion of sugar than he paid for. A few more nails than he requested when he needed to repair something at the ranch. "You are going to give away the whole store at this rate," her father said on the 4th day, his tone amused rather than angry. Thomas Edwards was a shrewd businessman but not an unkind man, and he had noticed the tall cowboy's daily visits. "I am doing no such thing," Josie protested, feeling her cheeks warm. "Just good business, making sure customers feel welcome." "Is that what you call it?" Her father chuckled, shaking his head. "Just be careful, Josie. Cowboys are wandering folk by nature, here today, gone tomorrow." But Peter kept coming back. By the end of the first week, Josie had learned he was from San Antonio originally, that he was 23 years old, and that he had been working ranches since he was 15. He spoke little about his family, and she sensed a sadness there she did not want to press him about. Instead, She told him about Springerville, about the territory and its wild beauty, about the things she had read in the books she borrowed from the circuit preacher who came through monthly. "You read a lot?" Peter asked one afternoon, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Everything I can get my hands on," Josie admitted. "Not much else to do in a town this size. I have read Mr. Dickens and Miss Austen, and there was a copy of Mr. Hawthorne's work that came through last year." "Never learned much beyond basic reading myself," Peter said, and there was no shame in his voice, just a statement of fact. "Always been more comfortable with horses than books." "There is nothing wrong with that," Josie said quickly. "I think knowing how to work with your hands is just as valuable as knowing how to read." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face, and Josie felt something shift in her chest like a door opening to let in light. By the second week, Peter's visits had become a routine. He would come in around 3 in the afternoon, when the day's heat was at its peak, and her father often went to rest in the back room. They would talk while she measured out his purchases, their conversations growing longer, more personal. He told her about life on the trail, about sleeping under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt, about rivers that ran clear as glass and mountains that scraped the sky. She told him about her dreams of seeing more of the world, about her mother who had died when Josie was 12, about the loneliness of being the only young woman in a town full of weathered ranchers and married couples. "Do not you have friends your age?" Peter asked. "A few," Josie said. "But most girls marry young out here. They have babies and households to run. I help with the store, and that keeps me busy enough." "Your father never thought about sending you somewhere for schooling? Santa Fe, maybe, or even back east?" "He mentioned it once, but I could not leave him alone with the store. He needs me here." She paused, weighing her next words. "And truthfully, I think I would miss this place too much for all its limitations." "It is a good town," Peter agreed, "better than most I have seen." On the 10th day, Josie gave Peter 6 apples instead of the 3 he requested. This time, she did not bother with excuses about bruising. She simply placed them in the sack and met his eyes, daring him to question it. "You are very generous, Miss Edwards," he said softly. "Maybe I just like seeing you come back," she replied, surprised by her own boldness. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something unspoken. Peter's hand, reaching for the sack, brushed against hers, and neither of them moved to break the contact. His skin was warm, rough with work, and Josie could feel her pulse jumping in her throat. "I would come back without the extra apples," Peter said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Would you? Been coming back for days now, and it was not for the groceries." Before Josie could respond, the back door opened and her father emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth. Peter stepped back smoothly, professionally, tipping his hat. "Good day, Mr. Edwards, Miss Edwards." "Good day, Mr. Stone," her father replied, his eyes moving between them with an expression Josie could not quite read. That evening, as they closed the store, her father said, "He seems like a decent young man." "Yes, he does," Josie agreed, keeping her voice neutral. "Cowboys do settle down sometimes, you know. Get tired of wandering, find something worth staying for." Josie looked at her father in surprise. "Are you giving me permission to court?" "I am saying I would not object if a hard-working young man with good manners wanted to call on my daughter properly." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Your mother, God rest her, would have liked him." Josie felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of her mother. "You think so?" "She always said you would fall for someone with kind eyes. That boy has kind eyes." The next day, Peter came in earlier than usual, just after 2. He was cleaned up, his shirt pressed, his hair still damp from washing. Josie felt her heart start to hammer as he approached the counter. "Miss Edwards," he began, then stopped, his confidence seeming to desert him. He cleared his throat and started again. "I was wondering if you might like to go walking with me sometime. Properly, I mean, with your father's permission." "I would like that very much," Josie said, trying to keep the joy out of her voice and failing entirely. "Tomorrow is Sunday. Would that suit?" "That would be perfect." Peter bought his supplies, and this time when Josie added extra apples, he laughed outright, the sound filling the store like music. "You are determined to keep me well fed, are not you?" "Someone has to look after you," she said, then blushed at her own forwardness. "I am starting to think I could get used to that," Peter replied, and the look he gave her made Josie's knees feel weak. Sunday afternoon arrived clear and bright, the late August heat tempered slightly by a breeze that smelled of dust and sage. Peter arrived at the store precisely at 3, as they had agreed, wearing his best clothes and holding his hat in his hands. Thomas Edwards opened the door, looked the young man up and down with a father's critical eye, then nodded. "Have her back before sunset," he said gruffly. "And stay where people can see you." "Yes, sir," Peter agreed. They walked down the main street, Josie's hand resting lightly on Peter's arm, conscious of the eyes watching them from windows and porches. In a town the size of Springerville, a young woman walking out with a cowboy was news that would be discussed over every dinner table that evening. Josie tried not to care about the gossip, focusing instead on the solid warmth of Peter's arm beneath her fingers, the way he shortened his stride to match hers. "Where are we going?" she asked as they passed the last of the buildings. "Thought we could walk by the river," Peter said. "There is a spot the other ranch hands told me about, with cottonwood trees for shade. Still within sight of town, so your father will not worry." "That sounds lovely." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, following the worn path that led down to the little Colorado River. The cottonwoods appeared ahead, their leaves rustling in the breeze, and Peter guided her to a flat rock near the water's edge where they could sit and watch the current flow past. "This is peaceful," Josie said, settling her skirts around her. "I do not come out here often enough." "Too busy with the store. That and not much reason to come alone." She glanced at him. "You must think me very boring, never having been anywhere or done anything." "I think no such thing," Peter said firmly. "You have built a whole world for yourself in that store with your books and your imagination. That takes its own kind of courage. You are kind to say so." "I mean it." He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water, watching the ripples spread. "I have seen a lot of country, Miss Edwards, and most of it is just hard ground and harder work. The interesting parts are not the places. They are the people you meet along the way." "Is that why you keep moving? To meet new people?" Peter was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the flowing water. "I keep moving because I never had much reason to stay anywhere. My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I got shuffled between relatives for a while, but nobody wanted another mouth to feed, not really. So I started working ranches as soon as I was big enough to sit a horse. Been drifting ever since." Josie's heart ached at the loneliness in his voice. "I am so sorry." "That must have been terribly hard." "It was what it was," Peter said with a shrug. "Made me independent at least, and it taught me to appreciate the good things when I find them." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "Things like extra apples from a pretty girl who smiles like sunshine." Josie felt herself blushing again, but she did not look away. "You think I am pretty?" "I think you are the prettiest thing I have seen in all my wandering," Peter said honestly. "And I think you have a good heart, which matters more than pretty." "You have a good heart too," Josie said softly. "I could see it from the first day, in the way you spoke so politely, the way you counted your coins so carefully." A man who respects what he has and treats people kindly is a rare thing. They talked for hours as the sun moved across the sky, about everything and nothing. Peter told her about the horses he had worked with, the cattle drives he had been on, the time he had seen a prairie storm roll in like an ocean wave across the grasslands. Josie told him about running the store, about the characters who came through town, about her dreams of maybe one day having a lending library in Springerville where people could borrow books. That would be something, Peter said. This territory could use more learning, more culture. Most towns out here, people are so focused on surviving they forget about living. Yes, exactly, Josie exclaimed, delighted that he understood. That is exactly what I think. We are not savages just because we live on the frontier. We can still have beauty and knowledge and art. With people like you around, I believe we will, Peter said, and the admiration in his voice made Josie feel like she could do anything. The sun was touching the horizon when Peter finally stood and offered his hand to help Josie to her feet. They walked back toward town slowly, neither wanting the afternoon to end. At the store's front door, Peter released her arm and stepped back a respectful distance. "Thank you for walking with me, Miss Edwards. Thank you for asking me, Mr. Stone. Might I call on you again?" "I would like that very much." "Tomorrow, then." The hope in his voice was unmistakable. "Tomorrow," Josie agreed, smiling. True to his word, Peter came back the next day and the day after that. Sometimes they walked. Sometimes they simply sat on the store's porch in the evening after closing, talking while her father worked on his account books inside. Word spread through Springerville that Thomas Edwards' daughter was being courted by the cowboy from the Miller Ranch, and opinions were divided. Some thought it romantic. Others worried that Josie would be left heartbroken when Peter inevitably moved on to the next town, the next job. "You hear what people are saying?" Josie's friend Margaret Wilson asked one afternoon when she came into the store for thread. Margaret was 22, married to a blacksmith, and already had a baby on her hip. "I hear," Josie said, measuring out the thread. "And it does not bother you." "That he is a drifter." "He is a ranch hand, not a drifter," Josie corrected gently. "And people can change, Margaret. People can decide to settle down." "Has he said he wants to settle down?" Josie hesitated. That was the question, was not it? In all their conversations, Peter had never spoken about the future, about staying in Springerville beyond the season. She knew the work at the Miller Ranch would end in another month when the cattle were moved to winter pasture. "What happened then?" "We are taking things slowly," Josie said finally. Margaret shifted her baby to her other hip, her expression sympathetic. "I just do not want to see you hurt, Josie. You have such a good heart, and men like that, well, they are used to leaving." "I know the risks," Josie said, more sharply than she intended, "but thank you for your concern." After Margaret left, Josie stood behind the counter feeling troubled. Were people right to worry? Was she setting herself up for heartbreak? Peter had never promised her anything, never spoken of love or permanence. Maybe she was reading more into their friendship than he intended. That evening, when Peter came by, she was quieter than usual. They sat on the porch as dusk gathered, and Peter noticed her mood immediately. "Something wrong?" he asked. "Just tired," Josie said, not quite meeting his eyes. "You are a terrible liar, Josie Edwards." He had started using her first name about a week earlier, and she had not objected. "What is really bothering you?" Josie took a breath, deciding on honesty. "People in town are talking about us. Let them talk. They say you will leave when the season ends. That I am foolish to get attached to a cowboy who will just move on to the next job." Peter was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. "Is that what you think? That I am just passing time with you?" "I do not know what to think," Josie admitted. "You have never talked about what happens after the season ends. Maybe people are right. Maybe this is just a pleasant distraction for you." "A distraction?" Peter stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. "Josie, these past weeks with you have been the first time in my life I have felt like I had a home to come back to. Do you understand that? Every day I wake up and the first thing I think about is seeing you. The work does not feel so hard because I know at the end of it I get to hear your voice, see you smile. That is not a distraction. That is everything." Josie stood too, her heart pounding. "Then why have you never said so? Why have you never talked about the future?" "Because I am scared," Peter said, turning to face her. "I am scared that I do not have enough to offer you. I am a ranch hand with maybe $50 saved. You are the daughter of a successful businessman. Your father could probably match you with someone who owns land, someone established. What can I give you? A life of uncertainty, of moving from job to job. You could give me yourself," Josie said, moving closer to him. "Do you think I care about money or land? I care about you, Peter, about the person you are, the way you see the world, the way you make me feel. That is worth more than all the established ranchers in the territory." "You mean that?" His voice was rough with emotion. "I mean every word." Peter reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I have been trying to save money to build up enough that I could maybe lease some land, start my own small spread. It would take time, years maybe, but I could work toward it. Would you wait for that?" "For me? How much time are we talking about?" Josie asked practically. 2 years, maybe 3. If I am careful, if I take jobs that pay well and do not spend foolishly." Josie considered this. 3 years was a long time, but it was not forever, and if that was what it took to build a real future together, she was willing to wait. But then another thought occurred to her. "Or," she said slowly, "you could stay in Springerville. My father has been talking about expanding the store, maybe adding lumber and building supplies to our stock. He would need help, someone strong and trustworthy. The pay would not be as much as ranch work, but it would be steady, year-round. And you would be here." Peter's eyes widened. "You think your father would hire me? I think he would welcome the help. And Peter, between your wages and what I make from the store, we could save together. Build toward a future together. It would go faster that way." "You have really thought about this?" "I think about you all the time," Josie admitted. "About us, about what we could build together." Peter pulled her closer, and Josie went into his arms without hesitation. This was the closest they had ever been, improper by the town's standards, but feeling perfectly right to Josie. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, smell the soap he had used and the sunshine baked into his shirt. "I love you, Josie Edwards," Peter said into her hair. "I have loved you since the day you gave me those extra apples and looked at me like I mattered. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like." "I love you too," Josie whispered. "So much it frightens me sometimes." They stood there on the porch as full dark fell around them, holding each other and making promises in the quiet. When they finally separated, Peter's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I should talk to your father," he said. "Ask him properly about the job and about courting you with intent to marry. He is inside. He probably heard everything anyway, the walls are thin." Peter laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Then I should not keep him waiting." Thomas Edwards did indeed hire Peter Stone, and if he had been listening to their conversation on the porch, he was kind enough not to mention it. The arrangement was that Peter would finish out his contract at the Miller Ranch, then transition to working at the store full-time. It would mean a slight cut in pay initially, but with room and board included, it made financial sense. The town watched this development with interest. Some were pleased, seeing it as a sign that Peter was serious about settling down. Others remained skeptical, waiting for him to bolt at the first opportunity. Peter ignored the gossip, focused on his work at the ranch and his evenings with Josie. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the promise of autumn. Peter moved his few belongings into the small room above the store that Thomas had previously used for storage. It was cramped but clean, with a window that overlooked the main street. Peter seemed to find it palatial compared to the bunkhouses and camping spots he was accustomed to. "Never had a room to myself before," he told Josie as he unpacked his saddle bags. "This is something." "It is not much," Josie said, looking around at the bare walls and simple furniture. "It is perfect," Peter insisted. "It is mine and it is near you. That makes it the finest room in the territory." Working together in the store proved natural for them. Peter's strength was useful for moving heavy supplies, and his honest manner put customers at ease. He learned quickly, memorizing prices and inventory with surprising ease for someone who claimed to be poorly educated. Thomas was impressed by his work ethic and his respectful manner with Josie, always proper during business hours but warm enough that anyone could see the affection between them. The extra apples continued, though now they were a private joke between Peter and Josie. Whenever he helped unpack a shipment of fruit, he would slip an apple into her apron pocket when her father was not looking, grinning when she discovered it later. In return, Josie would leave small surprises in his room: a new book she thought he might enjoy, cookies she had baked, a shirt she had mended when she noticed the cuff was fraying. "You do not have to take care of me," Peter said one evening when he found a fresh loaf of bread on his table. "I know I do not have to," Josie replied. "I want to." "Is that so wrong?" "Not wrong at all," Peter said softly. "Just not something I am used to, having someone care." "You had better get used to it," Josie said firmly, "because I intend to care about you for a very long time." By October, they had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Peter would rise early to help Thomas open the store. They would work through the day serving customers and managing inventory. And in the evenings after closing, Peter and Josie would walk or sit together, talking about their day and their dreams. On Sundays, they would attend church together, sitting in the back pew with Josie's hand tucked into the crook of Peter's arm. The town had stopped gossiping, for the most part. It was clear that Peter Stone was not going anywhere, that he had found his reason to stay. Even the skeptics had to admit that the cowboy had turned into a respectable shopkeeper, and that Josie Edwards glowed with happiness in a way she never had before. One Sunday in late October, Peter and Josie rode out of town in the wagon to see the autumn colors in the high country. Thomas had given his permission with only the instruction that they be home before dark. They packed a picnic lunch and headed into the hills where the aspens were turning gold. "It is beautiful up here," Josie breathed, taking in the shimmering leaves against the deep blue sky. "Like something from a painting." "Not as beautiful as you," Peter said, and though the words were simple, the sincerity in his voice made them profound. They spread a blanket near a creek and ate the lunch Josie had packed: bread and cheese and apples, always apples. The day was cool but pleasant, the sun warm on their shoulders. After they ate, Peter lay back on the blanket, his hat over his eyes, and Josie leaned against a tree trunk, watching him with a fond smile. "Peter, are you happy?" He pushed his hat back and looked at her. "Happiest I have ever been. Why do you ask?" "I just want to make sure you gave up the life you knew to be here. I want to know it is enough for you, that I am enough." Peter sat up, his expression serious. "Josie, the life I knew before was lonely. I was always looking for something without knowing what it was. Then I walked into your father's store and you smiled at me and gave me extra apples, and I realized what I had been searching for. Home. You. This is not me giving something up. This is me finally finding what I was meant to find." "I love you so much," Josie said, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you more," Peter replied, pulling her close, "and I am going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." They sat together under the golden aspens, wrapped in each other's arms, and Josie felt a contentment so deep it seemed to settle into her bones. This was what she had been waiting for, this sense of rightness, of coming home to a person rather than a place. As the afternoon waned, Peter stood and helped Josie to her feet. But instead of heading back to the wagon, he took both her hands in his and looked into her eyes. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, "about how you are the best thing that ever happened to me, about how I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy. But standing here with you, all those fancy words just seemed to disappear." Josie's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. "So I will just say this plain," Peter continued. "Josie Edwards, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and spend my life loving you the way you deserve to be loved?" "Yes," Josie whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." Peter reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It is not much," he said. "I bought it from the jeweler in St. John's with the money I had saved. I know it is not fancy, but it is perfect," Josie interrupted, holding out her left hand. "Absolutely perfect." Peter slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her. Josie held up her hand, watching the gold catch the afternoon light, then threw her arms around Peter's neck. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. "When?" Josie asked when he set her down. "When can we marry?" "Whenever you want," Peter said. "Tomorrow, if you will have me that soon." "My father will want to give us a proper wedding," Josie said practically, though her heart was singing with happiness. "And there are arrangements to make." "But soon, Peter. As soon as we can manage it." They rode back to town as the sun was setting, sitting close together on the wagon seat, Josie's left hand clasped in Peter's right. When they pulled up in front of the store, Thomas Edwards was sitting on the porch, clearly waiting for them. "Evening, sir," Peter called out, helping Josie down from the wagon. "Evening," Thomas replied, his eyes moving between them. "You two look particularly happy." "Papa," Josie said, climbing the porch steps. "Peter asked me to marry him. I said yes." For a moment Thomas said nothing, his face unreadable. Then he smiled, a wide, genuine smile that crinkled his whole face. "Well, it is about time. I was beginning to think the boy would never get around to asking." "You knew he was planning to propose?" Josie asked. "He asked my permission last week," Thomas said. "I told him not to wait too long, that some other fellow might snatch you up if he dawdled." Peter laughed, shaking Thomas's hand. "No chance of that, sir. I was not going to risk it." They went inside to celebrate with coffee and the cake Josie had baked that morning. Thomas raised his cup in a toast. "To my daughter and my future son-in-law, may you have all the happiness you deserve." The wedding was planned for early December, giving them enough time to make arrangements, but not so long that they would have to wait through the winter. Josie sewed her own dress, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Margaret Wilson and 2 other women from town helped with the preparations, baking cakes and making decorations for the small ceremony that would take place in the church. Peter bought a new suit, his first ever, and practiced his vows in his room above the store until he could recite them without stumbling. He was nervous in a way Josie had never seen him, pacing and fidgeting, worried that something would go wrong. "Nothing is going to go wrong," Josie assured him a few days before the wedding. "Unless you decide to run off, and I will hunt you down if you do." "Never," Peter said seriously. "I am not going anywhere without you, not ever again." The wedding day arrived cold and clear, the first week of December bringing a dusting of snow to the high country, though the town itself remained dry. Josie woke before dawn, too excited to sleep, and dressed carefully with Margaret's help. Her hair was pinned up with small white flowers, and her mother's pearl earrings hung from her ears, a connection to the woman who could not be there to see this day. "You look beautiful," Margaret said, adjusting Josie's veil. "Peter is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Josie replied, meaning it. The church was full when they arrived, seemingly the entire town turning out for the wedding. Josie had not expected such a crowd, but it warmed her heart to see the community gathering to celebrate with them. Peter stood at the altar with the preacher, looking terrified and elated in equal measure. When he saw Josie walking down the aisle on her father's arm, his whole face transformed with joy. Thomas placed Josie's hand in Peter's, squeezing both their hands before stepping back. The preacher began the ceremony, his words washing over Josie like a benediction. She heard herself promising to love and honor, heard Peter's voice, steady now, making the same promises. Then the preacher was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Peter was kissing her gently, reverently, as the congregation applauded. The reception was held in the schoolhouse, the biggest building available, with tables laden with food and a fiddler playing cheerful tunes. People danced and ate and offered congratulations, and Josie floated through it all in a haze of happiness, her hand clasped firmly in Peter's. "Happy," he murmured during a quiet moment. "Happier than I knew was possible," Josie replied. They left the reception as dusk fell, walking back to the store through the quiet streets. Thomas had discreetly moved his belongings to a friend's house for the night, giving them privacy. Peter carried Josie over the threshold of the store, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the middle of the room. "Mrs. Stone," he said wonderingly. "Josie Stone, that sounds right." "It does," Josie agreed, reaching up to touch his face. "It sounds perfect." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a discovery of each other in the privacy of the small room that would now be theirs to share. Peter was gentle, patient, and Josie felt cherished in a way she had never imagined possible. Afterwards, they lay tangled together under the quilts, whispering plans for their future, for the life they would build together. The winter passed in a blur of domestic happiness. Josie and Peter settled into married life with an ease that surprised even them. They worked side by side in the store during the day, and in the evenings they would cook simple meals in the small kitchen, do the washing up together, then sit by the fire reading or just talking. It was a quiet life, but it was theirs, and they were deeply content. Thomas Edwards moved back into his own house after a few weeks, declaring that newlyweds needed their space. He came to the store every day to work, but he had started talking about retiring in a few years, about leaving the business to Peter and Josie to run fully. "You two have made this place feel alive again," he told them one evening in January. "Your mother would have loved seeing this, Josie, seeing you so happy." "I wish she could have met Peter," Josie said wistfully. "She knows," Thomas said with certainty. "Wherever she is, she knows, and she is pleased." Spring came early to Arizona territory that year, March bringing warm days and the first wildflowers blooming across the desert. Josie stood in the store one afternoon feeling queasy, the smell of the coffee beans suddenly overwhelming. She had been feeling off for a few days, tired and emotional, her appetite strange. Margaret Wilson came in that day and took one look at Josie's face. "You are pregnant," she said matter-of-factly. "What? No, I am just tired. Trust me, I know the signs. How long since your last monthly?" Josie thought about it, counting back, and felt her eyes widen. 6 weeks, maybe 7. "There you go. You are going to have a baby, Josie Stone." The news took a moment to sink in, then Josie felt a smile spreading across her face. A baby. She and Peter were going to have a baby. The thought filled her with a joy so intense it was almost frightening. She waited until that evening to tell Peter, wanting the moment to be private. After they closed the store and ate dinner, she took his hand and led him to sit on their bed. "I have something to tell you," she said. Peter looked immediately concerned. "What is wrong? Are you sick?" "No, not sick. Peter, I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." The look of shock on his face would have been comical in any other circumstance. "A baby? You are certain as I can be." "Margaret helped me realize it this afternoon. I should have noticed sooner, but I suppose I was not looking for it." Peter's hands came up to frame her face, his eyes searching hers. "A baby, our baby. Josie, I do not have words for what this is. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her close, cradling her against his chest. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful and a dozen other things all at once. A baby. I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Josie said with certainty. Over the following months, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Peter built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving small stars along the headboard. Josie sewed tiny gowns and knitted soft blankets, her needle flying through the work during slow periods at the store. Thomas was beside himself with excitement at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, already talking about teaching his grandchild to read and count. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite the summer heat. Josie grew round and uncomfortable as August arrived, but Peter doted on her constantly, fetching whatever she craved, rubbing her sore back, reading to her in the evenings. His protectiveness was sometimes comical, hovering whenever she climbed the stairs or lifted anything heavier than a book. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Josie protested one afternoon when he tried to stop her from reaching for a jar on a high shelf. "I know, but I want to keep you safe. Both of you. We are perfectly safe. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Well, this is my wife and my baby, so forgive me for being cautious," Peter said, but he was smiling. The baby came in mid-September, on a hot afternoon when Josie's water broke while she was sweeping the store floor. Peter went pale with panic, but Thomas took charge, sending Peter to fetch the midwife while he helped Josie upstairs to bed. The labor was long but not unusually difficult. Peter paced downstairs until the midwife finally took pity on him and allowed him into the room to hold Josie's hand. He stayed with her through the final hours, murmuring encouragement, wiping her face with a cool cloth, telling her over and over how much he loved her and how strong she was. When the baby finally arrived, squalling lustily, the midwife announced, "You have a son, a healthy boy." Peter's eyes filled with tears as the midwife placed the baby in Josie's arms. He was red-faced and wrinkled and perfect, his tiny fists waving in the air. Josie felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible, looking down at this small person they had created. "What should we name him?" she asked Peter, who could not seem to stop staring at his son in wonder. "What about James?" Peter suggested. "James Thomas Stone, after your father." Josie looked at her father, who was standing in the doorway with tears running unashamedly down his face. "Papa." "Would that be all right?" "More than all right," Thomas managed. "It would be an honor." Baby James was a good baby, sleeping and eating well, growing stronger each day. Peter was a natural father, gentle and patient with the infant, walking him when he cried at night, changing soiled cloths without complaint, singing old cowboy songs in a soft voice to help him sleep. Josie would watch her husband with their son and feel overwhelmed with love for them both. The store remained busy, but they managed by taking turns minding James and serving customers. Thomas helped more now, delighted by any excuse to hold his grandson. The town women came by with gifts and advice, some helpful and some less so, but all well-meaning. Margaret Wilson stopped by often, bringing her own children to play while she kept Josie company. "You look happy," she said one afternoon while their children napped. "Exhausted but happy." "I am both," Josie admitted, "but mostly happy. Margaret, a year ago I could not have imagined this life. Peter, the baby, this sense of family, it is more than I ever dreamed of." "You deserve it," Margaret said warmly. "You both do, I will admit. I had my doubts about that cowboy at first, but he has proved me wrong in every way. He clearly adores you and that baby." "He does," Josie agreed, smiling. "Sometimes I still cannot quite believe this is real, that this is my life now." As James grew from infant to toddler, the store continued to thrive. Peter had a knack for business that surprised everyone, including himself. He started extending credit to ranchers who were short on cash, keeping careful records, and they always paid him back. He added new stock items based on what customers requested, gradually expanding their inventory. By the time James was 2, Edwards General Store had become Stone Family Store, with a new sign Peter had painted himself. "Your father insisted," Peter told Josie when she saw the new sign. "Said it was past time we made it official that we are running things now." Thomas had indeed stepped back from the daily operations, though he still came by most days to visit and help where needed. He was in his early 60s now, and his health was starting to fail in small ways. Peter and Josie made sure he always had a comfortable chair by the fire, good food, and the company of his grandson whenever he wanted it. One evening in December of 1885, 3 years after Peter had first walked into the store, Thomas sat by the fire with James on his knee, reading to the boy from a picture book. Josie and Peter were doing inventory, but they kept glancing over at the sweet scene. "Your father is a good man," Peter said quietly. "I hope I can be half the grandfather to our children that he is to James." "Our children," Josie repeated. "Does that mean you want more? If you do, I would like James to have siblings, to never be alone the way I was." Peter set down his pencil and took her hand. "What do you think?" "I think I would like that too," Josie said. "A house full of children sounds perfect." She discovered she was pregnant again in the spring of 1886, and their daughter Sarah was born that November. Peter had been hoping for a girl, he admitted, someone who might have Josie's smile and gentle ways. Sarah had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, and she was a calm, content baby from the start. James, now 3, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help feed her or fetch her blankets. Watching her son and daughter together filled Josie with a contentment so deep it felt like peace itself. Thomas's health declined more seriously that winter. He caught a cold that settled into his lungs, and despite the doctor's care, he grew weaker. Josie spent hours at his bedside, holding his hand and talking to him about everything and nothing. Peter kept the store running and cared for the children, bringing them to visit their grandfather when he felt strong enough. In March of 1887, Thomas Edwards passed away peacefully in his sleep. The whole town turned out for his funeral, testament to the respect he had earned over his years in Springerville. Josie grieved deeply for her father, but she found comfort in Peter's steady presence, and in knowing that Thomas had died happy, surrounded by family, having seen his daughter well settled and his grandchildren thriving. "He was proud of you," Peter told her one night as they lay in bed, Josie crying softly against his shoulder. "He told me once that you had exceeded every hope he ever had for you, that you were strong and kind and had built something real here." "I miss him so much," Josie whispered. "I know. I miss him too, but he is still with us, Josie. In James's middle name, in the store he built, in everything he taught us. That does not go away." The years that followed were full and busy. The store continued to grow. and Peter's reputation as an honest, fair businessman spread beyond Springerville. They added more inventory, eventually building an extension onto the back of the store to hold lumber and building supplies, just as Thomas had once envisioned. Peter hired a part-time clerk to help manage the increased business, a young man from town named Robert who was eager to learn. Their family grew as well. A third child, a son named William, was born in 1888. Then another daughter, Lucy, came in 1890. The house above the store had become too small for their growing family, so Peter used their savings to buy a piece of land at the edge of town and began building a proper house. "Nothing fancy," he told Josie as he showed her the plans, "but big enough for all of us, with a real kitchen and bedrooms for the children." "It is perfect," Josie said, studying the drawings. "Peter, look at what we have built together. From extra apples to this. It seems impossible sometimes." "Best investment I ever made, buying groceries from you," Peter said with a grin. "Especially the apples." They moved into the new house in the spring of 1891 when James was 8, Sarah was 4, William was 3, and Lucy was 1. It was chaos and joy in equal measure, unpacking crates and hanging curtains while the children raced through empty rooms, their laughter echoing off bare walls. Peter carried Josie over the threshold just as he had on their wedding night, both of them older now, a bit worn by life but happy in ways they could not have imagined back then. The house became a true home quickly. Josie planted flowers in the front yard and vegetables in the back. Peter built a swing for the children from a sturdy oak tree. They established routines and traditions, Sunday dinners with neighbors, reading time before bed, walks into town for ice cream on summer evenings. James proved to be clever with numbers, already helping his father with basic bookkeeping by age 10. Sarah was quieter, happiest with a book in hand, reminding Josie of herself at that age. William was all energy and mischief, constantly bringing home stray animals and scraped knees. Lucy was the baby, charming everyone with her gap-toothed smile and fearless nature. One evening in the summer of 1893, after the children were finally asleep, Peter and Josie sat on their front porch watching the stars emerge. They were both tired, as they always were with 4 children under 12, but they were content. "Remember when we sat by the river on our first walk?" Josie asked. "And I asked if you were happy." "I remember," Peter said, taking her hand. "I want to ask again. Are you happy, Peter? Really happy? You gave up your wandering ways, tied yourself to this town, to this life. Do you ever regret it?" Peter turned to look at her, his eyes serious in the fading light. "Josie Stone, every single day I thank God that I walked into your father's store 11 years ago. Every day I am grateful that you saw something in a dusty cowboy worth caring about. Every day I look at you, at our children, at the life we have built, and I think I am the luckiest man who ever lived. Regret? The only thing I regret is every year I lived before I met you, because they were wasted time." "They were not wasted," Josie said softly. "They brought you to me. Every job, every town, every dusty trail led you to Springerville, to my father's store, to me giving you extra apples." "Those extra apples changed my whole life," Peter said. "Best thing that ever happened to me." "They were just apples," Josie protested, laughing. "No, they were not. They were kindness. They were you seeing me, not just another customer, but a person worth caring about. That meant everything to a man who spent his whole life being invisible. You made me visible, Josie. You made me real." Josie felt tears welling up. "You were always real. You were always worth caring about. I am just glad I got to be the one to do it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars and listening to the peaceful sounds of their sleeping house. Inside, Their children dreamed their childish dreams. Down the street, the store they ran together stood solid and successful. Around them, the town they had made their home settled into night. "You ever think about what might have happened if I had not given you those extra apples?" Josie asked. "Sometimes," Peter admitted. "I would have finished my shopping and left. Probably never come back, moved on to the next town after the season ended. I would have lived my whole life not knowing what I was missing. It is a terrible thought. Maybe you would have found someone else somewhere else." "No," Peter said with certainty. "It was always you, Josie. From the moment you smiled at me, it was you. I just did not know it yet." James started working in the store regularly when he turned 12, showing the same head for business his father had developed. He was good with customers, polite and efficient, and Peter took pride in teaching his eldest son everything he knew. Sarah preferred to help her mother with the younger children and the household, but she also had a way with numbers that Josie encouraged, teaching her to do the bookkeeping. William announced at age 9 that he wanted to be a rancher, not a shopkeeper, and Peter supported this dream, teaching his son about horses and cattle when time allowed. Lucy was still too young to know what she wanted, but at 5 years old she was already showing signs of her mother's generous spirit, always sharing her toys and helping her siblings without being asked. The store continued to prosper through the 1890s. Arizona became a territory with dreams of eventual statehood, and Springerville grew along with it. New families arrived, new businesses opened, and the Stone family store remained at the heart of the community. Peter had become a respected figure in town, serving on the town council and helping settle disputes with fairness and wisdom. Josie had achieved her dream of starting a lending library, using a corner of the store to house donated books that people could borrow freely. She kept careful records of who had what book, and the library became popular with children and adults alike. It gave her great satisfaction to see people discovering the joy of reading, just as she had as a lonely girl behind the counter. In 1896, tragedy struck when a fire broke out in the eastern part of town. Several buildings burned before the volunteer fire brigade could contain it. The Stone family opened their store as a temporary shelter, and Josie coordinated efforts to feed and clothe those who had lost homes. Peter worked with other business owners to provide materials and labor to rebuild, extending generous credit to those who needed it. "You are going to bankrupt us," their clerk Robert warned, looking at the accounts. "We will be fine," Peter said confidently. "These are our neighbors. We help them now, and they will remember it. Besides, what good is success if you cannot use it to help people?" He was right. Every person they helped paid them back eventually, and the gratitude and loyalty they earned was worth more than money. The fire brought the community closer together, and the Stone family's generosity became part of local legend. James married at 21 in 1898 to a sweet girl named Catherine who worked as a schoolteacher. They had a simple ceremony in the church where Peter and Josie had married 16 years earlier. Watching her eldest son take his vows, Josie could not help but remember her own wedding day, how young and hopeful she and Peter had been. They were older now, both in their late 30s, with gray starting to thread through their hair, but that hope had never faded. James and Catherine lived in a small house near the store, and within a year they welcomed Peter and Josie's first grandchild, a boy they named Peter after his grandfather. Holding his namesake for the first time, Peter wept openly, overcome with emotion. "I never thought I would have this," he told Josie that night. "A family, grandchildren, roots that go deep. When I was young and drifting, this seemed like an impossible dream, something other men had but I never would." "You have it now," Josie said, wiping away his tears. "And you deserve every bit of it." Sarah married in 1900 at 19 to a banker's son from St. John's. William, true to his word, went to work for a large ranch south of town at 16, learning the cattle business from the ground up. Only Lucy remained at home, now 10 years old and the joy of her parents' middle years. The new century brought changes to the territory. Talk of statehood grew more serious. Automobiles began appearing occasionally on the streets, though horses remained far more common. The railroad expanded, bringing goods and people more easily than ever before. Through it all, the Stone family store adapted and thrived. Peter and Josie celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1902 with a party that filled their house and spilled into the yard. Friends and family gathered to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. James gave a toast, speaking about his parents' love and dedication to each other and to the town. Sarah sang a song she had written specially for the occasion. Even William rode in from the ranch to be there, dusty and sunburned but grinning. 20 years, Peter said later that night when they were alone. It has gone so fast. And so slow, Josie added. When I think about everything that has happened, all we have built together, it seems like we have lived 3 lifetimes. Here is to 20 more, Peter said, raising his glass. At least 20 more, Josie agreed, clinking her glass against his. Lucy graduated from school in 1905, the first of their children to complete all 12 grades. She announced her intention to become a nurse, inspired by helping during a fever outbreak the previous year. Peter and Josie were immensely proud, supporting her decision to attend a nursing program in Phoenix. With all their children grown and launched into their own lives, Peter and Josie found themselves alone together for the first time in over 20 years. The house seemed too quiet at first, too empty. But gradually they rediscovered the simple pleasure of each other's company, of lingering over breakfast and taking evening walks without worrying about children who needed tending. They traveled for the first time, taking the train to San Francisco for a week, seeing the ocean that Josie had only read about in books. Peter, who had seen so much of the West in his younger days, delighted in showing his wife new sights, holding her hand as they walked along the beach, watching her face light up with wonder. "Thank you for this," Josie said one evening as they watched the sunset over the Pacific. "For giving me adventures." "Thank you for giving me a home to come back to," Peter replied. "Adventures are only good if you have somewhere to return to at the end." They came back to Springerville bronzed and happy, with stories to tell their grandchildren. James and Catherine now had 3 children. Sarah had 2. William had married a rancher's daughter and was well on his way to having his own spread. Lucy had graduated from nursing school and was working at a hospital in Phoenix, though she came home to visit whenever she could. The store they passed to James to manage full-time in 1908, though Peter and Josie still came by regularly to help and to visit. Peter was 50 years old, his dark hair now thoroughly gray, his face lined with years of sun and laughter. Josie was 46, still beautiful to him, her smile still capable of lighting up his world. They spent more time on their porch, watching Springerville grow and change around them. Automobiles became more common. Electric lights appeared in some buildings. The territory pushed ever closer to statehood, which finally came in 1912, when Arizona became the 48th state in the Union. "We have lived through interesting times," Josie remarked one evening in early 1913. "From the Old West to this modern age. Sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed." "Some things never change," Peter said, taking her hand. "I loved you in 1882 and I love you now just as much or maybe more. that has been constant through everything. I love you too, Josie said. Every day I love you more. Even after 30 years, you still surprise me, still make me laugh, still make me feel like the luckiest woman alive. Even though I was just a cowboy who could not afford much, especially because of that, you gave me everything that mattered. Yourself, your heart, your loyalty, your partnership in building this life. What else could I possibly need? They held hands in the gathering dusk, two people who had grown old together, who had built something lasting from a chance meeting and a few extra apples. Behind them, their house held the memories of raising 4 children. Down the street, the store that bore their name continued to serve the community. Around them, grandchildren played and great-grandchildren would someday play. You ever regret giving me those extra apples? Peter asked, teasing. Never, Josie said firmly. Best decision I ever made. Even though you probably got in trouble with your father for giving away inventory, I never got in trouble. He knew what I was doing from the start. He told me later he had been hoping someone would come along who would see what a treasure his daughter was. She smiled at the memory. He said he knew you were the one when you came back the second day, and the third, and just kept coming back. Said only a man truly interested would be that persistent over apples. Peter laughed, the sound warm and familiar. I was persistent. I would have come back every day for a year if that was what it took. You only had to come back for 11 days before you kissed me. 11 days. Peter raised his eyebrows. Was it really that fast? It was. I counted. Well, when you know, Peter said. And I knew from the first day, even if it took me a bit to work up the courage. They sat in comfortable silence as night fell completely, the stars emerging one by one overhead. From somewhere down the street came the sound of laughter, probably their grandchildren playing. A dog barked. A horse whinnied in a nearby stable. The sounds of their town, their home. Lucy visited in the spring of 1914, bringing news that she was engaged to a doctor she had met at the hospital. The wedding would be in Phoenix that summer, and the whole family was expected to attend. It was a joyous celebration, the last of their children to marry, and Peter walked Lucy down the aisle with tears streaming down his face. I am not losing you, Lucy assured him at the reception. You will always be my father, my hero, the man who showed me what love and dedication look like. You are a remarkable woman, Peter told his youngest daughter. Your mother and I are so proud of the person you have become. The years continued to pass, each one bringing changes but also continuity. Grandchildren grew and married. Great-grandchildren arrived. The store remained successful under James's management, though Peter and Josie still dropped by regularly to visit and occasionally help out. They had become beloved elders in Springerville, the couple whose romance had started with extra apples and lasted through decades of devotion. In 1922, on their 40th wedding anniversary, the town threw them a massive celebration. It seemed like everyone in Springerville and beyond came to honor Peter and Josie Stone, the shopkeeper and the former cowboy who had built something beautiful together. Their children and grandchildren gave speeches. Friends shared stories. The mayor presented them with a plaque honoring their contributions to the community. 40 years, Peter said in his speech, his arm around Josie's shoulders. 40 years ago, I was a lonely cowboy with nothing but a horse and a few dollars in my pocket. I walked into Edwards' general store looking for supplies, and I walked out having found my whole future. Josie gave me extra apples that day, and I kept coming back, day after day, until she agreed to let me court her. She took a chance on a man with no prospects, no family, no reason to think he would ever amount to anything. And she changed my entire life. So I want to say thank you. Thank you to my wife for seeing past what I was to what I could become. Thank you to this town for welcoming me and giving me a home. And thank you to whatever force in the universe led me to walk through that store door on that particular day. There was not a dry eye in the house when he finished. Josie kissed him in front of everyone, to applause and cheers, and whispered, "Thank you for coming back every day. Thank you for staying." They continued on, into their 60s and then their 70s, slowing down but still together, still in love. They walked slower now, their hands clasped not just for affection but for support. They forgot things sometimes, names and dates drifting away like leaves on water. But they never forgot each other, never forgot the foundation of their life together. Peter's health began to fail in 1931. He was 72 years old and his heart was growing weak. The doctor said there was nothing to be done except rest and wait. Peter accepted this news with characteristic grace, more concerned about Josie than about himself. "I hate to leave you," he told her one night as they lay in bed. "That is my only regret." "You are not leaving me yet," Josie said firmly, though tears ran down her face. "You are going to be here for a long time still." "Maybe," Peter said, "but if I am not, I need you to know something. These 49 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You took a nobody cowboy and made him into someone who mattered. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. Every good thing I have ever had came from you." "That is not true," Josie protested. "You did that yourself. You built this life with me." "We built it together," Peter agreed. "And that is why it was so good, because it was us together always." He died peacefully 3 weeks later in his sleep, with Josie holding his hand. The whole town mourned Peter Stone, the cowboy who had settled down for love and become one of their most respected citizens. His funeral filled the church to overflowing, with people standing outside to pay their respects. He was buried in the Springerville cemetery under a cottonwood tree with a headstone that read, "Peter Stone, 1859–1931. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, he found home." Josie grieved deeply, but she did not break. She had their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren surrounding her with love. She had the memories of 49 years of marriage, of a love that had started with extra apples and grown into something that sustained whole generations. She had the knowledge that she and Peter had built something real, something that would outlast them both. She lived on for another 12 years, staying in the house Peter had built, tending her garden, visiting the store, playing with great-great-grandchildren who called her Gran and wanted to hear stories about the old days. She told them about their great-grandfather, about the tall cowboy who had walked into her father's store in 1882 and changed her whole world. She told them about giving him extra apples, about how he came back every day until he proposed. She told them about the life they had built together, about love and partnership, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly are. Josie Edwards Stone died in her sleep on a warm August night in 1943, at the age of 81. She was buried next to Peter, and the headstone they added to mark her grave read, "Josie Edwards Stone, 1862–1943. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she gave him apples and her heart." The Stone family store operated for another 20 years, passed down through 3 more generations before finally closing in 1963. But the legacy of Peter and Josie Stone lived on in their descendants, who spread across Arizona and beyond, carrying with them the story of the grocer's daughter who gave the cowboy extra apples, and the cowboy who came back every day until he could make her his wife. It became a family legend, a testament to the power of small kindnesses and the way love can transform everything. The house Peter built still stood in Springerville well into the 21st century, a landmark that locals pointed to when telling the story of the town's history. Their great-great-grandchildren would visit the graves sometimes, laying fresh flowers and reading the inscriptions, marveling at how a simple act of generosity in 1882 had led to the sprawling family tree they were part of. The story got told at family reunions and wedding toasts about great-great-grandma Josie, who gave away extra apples, and great-great-grandpa Peter, who knew a good thing when he found it and had the persistence to come back day after day until he won her heart. In the end, it was a simple love story, the kind that built the West as surely as railroads and ranches did. Two people who found each other against the odds, who chose each other every day for nearly 50 years, who built a life together that rippled outward through time. It started with apples, those 5 perfect apples that Josie had slipped into Peter's sack that hot August afternoon. But it became so much more. It became partnership and family and home. It became the kind of love that people write songs about, that lasts beyond lifetimes, that transforms not just the two people involved but everyone they touch. And somewhere in whatever comes after, perhaps Peter and Josie Stone found each other again, their hands clasping as naturally as breathing, ready to build something beautiful together once more, the way they had done in Springerville all those years ago. Because some love stories, the real ones, the true ones, never really end. They just continue on, in the hearts and memories of those left behind, in the legacy of family and community, in the simple truth that kindness matters and love endures, and sometimes all it takes is 5 extra apples to change the entire course of a life.